We hear stories about disruptive innovation all the time, right? But what actually happens when the disruptor becomes the disrupted? Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to perform a bit of an autopsy. We are diving into what used to be the most dominant tech company on Earth to uncover the real reason they lost absolutely everything. We're going to break down exactly how this massive empire crumbled from the inside out and look at the psychological traps that made it happen.
Okay, let's just start with this staggering reality. By 2007, Nokia wasn't just a successful business. They were a monolith. I mean, they controlled half of the entire global mobile phone market. Half. To put that level of wealth into perspective, at that time, they literally held more cash reserves than the entire gross domestic product of some small countries. They seemed entirely untouchable.
And their rise up to that point was just legendary. They evolved from a humble Finnish paper mill back in the 1860s into this global juggernaut. Think about the iconic, basically indestructible Nokia 3310. That single model sold over 126 million units. And that default ringtone? It didn't just tell you someone was calling, it actually became the most played piece of music in human history.
So, the crucial question we have to ask is, how does a company of this magnitude, a company that was pulling in more profit than most of the Fortune 500 combined, just completely collapse? Because within 8 short years from their absolute peak, they'd be sold off in pieces. Now, everyone loves to point to the iPhone as the obvious culprit here, but the real answer is way more complicated and honestly, deeply self-inflicted. Because here's the ultimate plot twist in tech history. Nokia didn't miss the smartphone revolution at all. They actually spearheaded it. They had already invented touchscreens, app stores, and internet-connected mobile phones literally years before the iPhone even existed. The entire blueprint for the next decade of technology was just sitting right there in their labs. And this is the real tragedy of the whole story. Their own brilliant engineers proved this new technology was ready for the market. But leadership looked at these revolutionary prototypes and, well, they panicked. Management deliberately shelved the new tech. They stamped it as rejected because they were absolutely terrified that a touchscreen internet phone would cannibalize their massively profitable existing phone sales. They basically chose not to compete with themselves.
And that fear of self-disruption, it bred this incredible internal hubris. When Steve Jobs launched the first iPhone in 2007, Nokia's leadership barely even blinked. Executives reportedly dismissed this world-changing device internally as just a toy. They were so blinded by their unbelievable profit margins that they couldn't fathom consumers wanting a device that didn't look and act like a traditional Nokia phone. This hubris triggered an absolute nightmare of a downward spiral. 2007 hits, the iPhone launches. A year later, Android launches. And vitally, Android is completely free for any manufacturer to use. But instead of pivoting, Nokia wasted critical, unrecoverable years doubling down on their own aging, clunky operating system, Symbian. That one single decision cost them years of innovation, and by 2010, Nokia's profits were in a third consecutive year of total freefall. The internal bureaucracy at that point was staggering. Symbian didn't just age poorly, it became a horribly fragmented mess split across a dozen disconnected device teams inside Nokia. It confused third-party developers so badly that they just threw their hands up and stopped trying to build apps for Nokia entirely. Meanwhile, Apple's App Store was seamlessly growing by thousands of new apps every single month. Desperate for a turnaround, the board brought in a brand new CEO in 2010, Stephen Elop. He recognized the existential threat immediately. His first major move was penning this dramatically worded internal memo that very quickly leaked to the press. In it, he famously compared Nokia to a man standing on a burning oil platform, saying they were forced to jump into the icy waters below just to survive. Now, usually, transparency is a good thing, right? But the immediate result of this leaked panic was completely devastating to the company. When the world read the CEO calling his own company a burning platform, investors fled. Nokia's stock price instantly plummeted by 14%, literally overnight. Confidence in the Finnish giant was entirely shattered in an instant. Just weeks after that catastrophic stock drop, Elop made a highly controversial announcement. Nokia was going to completely abandon their in-house Symbian operating system. But instead of jumping to the widely popular open-source Android platform like all their competitors were doing, Nokia locked themselves into an exclusive partnership with Microsoft's struggling Windows Phone platform. That strategy resulted in an absolute freefall. the market heavily rejected Windows Phone. By 2012, Nokia's dominant, world-beating 50% global market share had utterly collapsed to under 5%. To manage the massive financial bleeding, the company underwent huge restructuring, tragically resulting in over 40,000 Nokia employees losing their jobs.
With Nokia's mobile division bleeding out and heavily reliant on Microsoft's software anyway, Microsoft finally made its move in 2013. They swooped in and acquired Nokia's entire phone business for $7.2 billion. Think about that. One of the greatest standalone corporate entities in European history was now just a hardware division for a software giant out of Seattle.
What makes this acquisition endlessly fascinating to tech historians, though, is Stephen Alop himself. The very CEO who authored that burning platform memo, tied Nokia to Windows, and oversaw this entire collapse, had actually worked at Microsoft before joining Nokia. And right after this acquisition closed, he promptly returned to Microsoft. It leaves a lot of industry analysts, even today, wondering if the timing was merely a coincidence.
But if this really was some master plan by Microsoft, it failed spectacularly. Under Microsoft, Windows Phone just continued to lose ground. Just 3 years later, in 2016, Microsoft had to write off almost the entire massive acquisition. They quietly sold off whatever remaining pieces of the phone business they had for a mere $350 million. A $7.2 billion deal had become a $350 million fire sale. Just incredible.
Today, the consumer empire that once owned half the world's pockets is entirely gone. The modern Nokia you might hear about in the business world survives incredibly successfully, actually, but purely as a network infrastructure company, selling equipment behind the scenes to telecoms. And if you happen to see a brand new Nokia smartphone on a store shelf today, it's not really them. The name is simply licensed out to other third-party manufacturers.
The absolutely crucial takeaway here is a fundamental lesson in business psychology. Nokia didn't fail because they missed the future. Like we saw, their engineers literally built the future before anyone else. They failed because leadership was so deeply afraid to leave their comfortable, highly profitable present that they actively chose to protect the past instead. By the time they realized they had to catch up, the world had already moved on without them. This is the exact pattern that ends empires, and it really forces us to hold up a mirror to our own decision-making. As you look at your own projects, your investments, or even your career, you have to ask yourself a hard question. Are you actively building the future, or are you just desperately trying to protect the present? Keep innovating, and we'll see you next time.